The Clone Wars had consumed the galaxy with a hunger unlike anything seen in generations. Thousands of worlds that had once flourished beneath the protection of the Galactic Republic had become scarred battlegrounds where cities burned beneath relentless orbital bombardments, forests vanished beneath marching armies of battle droids, and ordinary citizens no longer looked toward Coruscant for hope but merely prayed that tomorrow would not bring another invasion. Every hyperspace lane carried warships instead of merchants. Every transmission spoke of victories that somehow felt like defeats. The Jedi Order, guardians of peace for over 1,000 generations, now wore the armor of generals instead of diplomats. They still carried lightsabers, but those elegant weapons had become instruments of war as much as symbols of justice. Hidden behind every battle, every political crisis, and every whispered conspiracy, a darkness continued weaving its web through the Republic, unseen by almost everyone who believed they still controlled their own destiny. Yet beyond the stars, beyond hyperspace, beyond the currents of the Force itself, another universe was about to collide with theirs. The Time Vortex had always been beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Endless rivers of impossible colors stretched through dimensions that no ordinary mind could comprehend, while fragments of countless histories drifted through its currents like glowing embers caught within an eternal storm. The TARDIS had crossed these impossible pathways for centuries beyond counting, guided by a pilot who had witnessed civilizations rise from the dust of forgotten planets only to disappear into myths before most species ever learned to walk upright. He had defeated monsters that fed on stars, negotiated peace between races separated by millions of years of hatred, and watched entire galaxies live and die. There were very few things left capable of surprising the Doctor. This was one of them. Without warning, the harmonious hum of the TARDIS deepened into an agonizing groan. The ancient vessel lurched violently, throwing sparks across the glowing coral-like control room as every monitor erupted with symbols that even the Doctor had never encountered before. The central time rotors surged up and down with increasing violence while the engines cried out as though the ship itself were alive and frightened. The Doctor gripped the console with both hands, his coat swirling around him as alarms echoed through the impossible interior. Well, that's definitely not supposed to happen. The scanners showed something impossible. The Time Vortex was no longer alone. Another force had reached into it. Not another universe. Not another dimension. Something alive. Something ancient. Something that seemed to bind an entire galaxy together through an invisible web of energy unlike anything Gallifreyan science had ever documented. The Doctor's smile disappeared. He stared at the readings. Beautiful. Then the collision came. The Force and the Time Vortex touched for the first time. Reality screamed. Across countless dimensions, invisible waves rippled through space itself. Entire timelines trembled for a fraction of a second before stabilizing once more. On Gallifrey, ancient instruments buried beneath the capital registered anomalies that no living Time Lord would ever understand. Somewhere beyond known existence, beings that observed the structure of reality itself turned their attention toward a single impossible point where two entirely different universal laws had begun interacting. The TARDIS vanished. Far away, in another galaxy, war waited. The planet Vardos Minor had once been known for its endless crystal lakes and towering forests whose leaves shimmered silver beneath twin moons. Now neither remained. Months of relentless fighting had transformed the landscape into a wasteland of smoking craters, shattered cliffs, burning wreckage, and trenches stretching across the horizon like fresh scars carved into the skin of the world. The air carried the bitter scent of burning metal, ionized plasma, and scorched earth. Thick smoke rolled across the battlefield, illuminated every few seconds by the crimson flashes of blaster fire. Clone troopers of the 501st Legion advanced through the ruined remains of an abandoned industrial district while squads of B-1 battle droids poured from shattered factories under the command of heavily armored super battle droids. Above them, LAT gunships exchanged fire with separatist tri-fighters weaving violently through black clouds stained orange by distant explosions. General Obi-Wan Kenobi stood atop the remains of a collapsed communications tower, calmly directing clone movements despite the chaos surrounding him. Every movement remained measured, every instruction precise. Around him, clone officers obeyed without hesitation, their confidence strengthened simply by his presence. Not far away, General Anakin Skywalker displayed a very different style of leadership. His blue lightsaber carved brilliant arcs through advancing battle droids as he pushed relentlessly toward the Separatist command position. Clone Captain Rex struggled to keep pace while issuing tactical orders over his helmet communicator. "General, we've identified at least 3 additional AAT columns approaching from the eastern ridge. Then we'd better finish this before they arrive." Anakin launched himself high above the battlefield, landing directly atop an advancing tank before driving his lightsaber through its armored hull. Flames erupted from the crippled vehicle as nearby droids scattered in confusion. To the clones watching him fight, it looked as though victory remained possible. Then every comm channel died. The silence arrived so suddenly that hundreds of soldiers instinctively looked around in confusion. Static consumed every transmission. Tactical displays flickered wildly before shutting down altogether. Even the battle droids stopped moving. For one impossible moment, the war itself paused. Obi-Wan slowly lifted his gaze toward the heavens. The Force had changed. Not grown darker. Not brighter. Different. It felt as though an entirely new current had begun flowing alongside the familiar energy field that connected every living thing. Master Yoda had once described the Force as music. This was another instrument joining the symphony. Above the battlefield, the clouds began twisting into a massive spiral. Blue light erupted across the sky. Not lightning. Not hyperspace. Not any natural phenomenon recognized by Republic science. A vast circular rupture opened among the clouds, revealing an endless tunnel filled with impossible colors that shifted faster than the eye could follow. Strange echoes drifted downward like distant voices carried across unimaginable distances. Gravity itself seemed uncertain. Clone troopers forgot their training. Battle droids ceased receiving commands. Even Anakin lowered his lightsaber. "What is that?" Obi-Wan did not answer. Because he did not know. The Force offered no explanation. It merely whispered caution. Then something emerged. Not a cruiser. Not an escape pod. Not a weapon. A small blue police box tumbled through the dimensional wound, spinning end over end before plummeting toward the battlefield. Its landing should have destroyed it. Instead, the impossible object struck the ground with a tremendous crash that sent mud, shattered duracrete, and pieces of wrecked battle droids flying in every direction before settling upright in the center of no man's land. Silence followed. The dimensional rupture snapped shut. The ordinary sounds of war slowly returned. Yet no one fired. Thousands of eyes remained fixed upon the battered blue box standing alone amid drifting smoke. Its faded sign read, "Police Public Call Box." Captain Rex frowned inside his helmet. "I've never seen anything like that." "Neither have I," Obi-Wan admitted quietly. Anakin began walking toward it. "So let's find out." Clone rifles immediately followed their general. Across the battlefield, confused battle droids did exactly the same. For perhaps the first time in Clone Wars history, both armies approached the same target together without firing a single shot. The air grew strangely still. The doors opened. Out stepped a man who looked completely ordinary. Brown coat, blue suit, untidy hair, a narrow bow tie, an old pair of worn boots. He carried no weapon. Instead, he held a curious metallic device that emitted a cheerful buzzing sound while tiny green lights blinked across its surface. He glanced left. Hundreds of clone troopers. He glanced right. Hundreds of battle droids. He looked upward at smoking gunships circling overhead before finally sighing. "Oh!" He tapped the strange device against the blue box. "I've done it again." The doctor looked directly at Anakin Skywalker. "Oh, that's not good." Anakin frowned. "What?" The doctor pointed toward the distant Separatist artillery hidden beyond the ridge. "They're going to fire in exactly." He checked an old pocket watch. 16 seconds. Rex immediately raised his rifle. "How could you possibly know that?" The doctor ignored the question. Instead, he began counting. 10. Obi-Wan instinctively reached out through the Force. The stranger felt Not evil. Not deceptive. Simply impossible. There was no clear presence. No familiar living signature. Instead, it was as though Obi-Wan sensed countless overlapping moments existing simultaneously around the man. Past, present, future, all layered together. 5. Anakin's instincts screamed that the stranger believed every word he was saying. 3. Obi-Wan turned toward the clone commanders. Take cover. The order had barely left his mouth when dozens of concealed separatist artillery cannons erupted from behind the ridge, launching an unexpected bombardment directly toward the Republic position. The first barrage landed exactly where the clone officers had been standing seconds earlier. Explosions shook the battlefield. Columns of dirt and burning debris shot skyward. Had Obi-Wan delayed even another heartbeat, hundreds of clones would have died. Instead, casualties remained astonishingly light. When the bombardment finally ceased, Anakin looked back toward the stranger with new respect. You knew. The doctor shrugged modestly. Not new. He smiled. I remembered. Neither Jedi understood what that meant. The doctor turned toward the battlefield, studying troop movements with astonishing speed. His eyes darted across smoking craters, damaged buildings, destroyed tanks, and advancing droid formations. Within seconds, he had noticed weaknesses that Republic tactical computers had completely overlooked. Without drawing a weapon, he began running directly toward the front lines. Clone troopers exchanged confused glances before racing after him. The doctor reached a damaged separatist communications relay half buried beneath rubble. Producing the buzzing metallic device once more, he scanned its circuitry for barely 3 seconds before smiling. There you are. Tiny sparks danced across the machine. The relay suddenly overloaded. Across the battlefield, hundreds of battle droids froze in place. Others began marching in the wrong direction. Several AAT tanks turned their cannons toward one another after receiving corrupted identification signals. A squadron of vulture droids abruptly disengaged from Republic gunships, convinced they had been ordered to retreat. General confusion spread through the entire separatist offensive. The doctor hadn't destroyed a single droid. He hadn't fired a weapon. He had simply convinced an army's communication network to argue with itself. Anakin watched in disbelief. I've never seen anyone fight like that. Obi-Wan's expression remained thoughtful. He isn't fighting. Indeed, the doctor seemed almost disappointed whenever explosions occurred. He sprinted across open ground, pulling wounded clone troopers into safer positions, redirecting collapsing machinery before it crushed trapped droids and soldiers alike, and shouting warnings whenever incoming artillery threatened either side. To the clones, he behaved unlike any commander. To the Jedi, he behaved unlike anyone they had ever met. As the smoke slowly cleared and the Republic gained control of the battlefield, Obi-Wan approached the blue box once more. Through the Force he searched again for understanding, yet every attempt only deepened the mystery. The impossible traveler standing before him felt older than many civilizations, burdened by countless unseen memories, and somehow completely disconnected from every pattern the Jedi had spent millennia studying. For the first time in years, Obi-Wan Kenobi realized the Force had not revealed everything there was to know about the universe. And somewhere far away on Coruscant, seated quietly within the Chancellor's office, Darth Sidious suddenly opened his eyes. He had felt it too. Something impossible had entered his galaxy. Before we discover who this mysterious traveler truly is, what secrets the impossible blue box hides, and why even Darth Sidious has begun to fear. A man carrying nothing more dangerous than a strange screwdriver and a smile, take a moment to support the channel. If you're enjoying this journey into one of the greatest multiverse crossovers imaginable, make sure you leave a like to help more Star Wars fans discover the story, share this video with fellow Doctor Who and Star Wars enthusiasts, and tell us in the comments what you think the Doctor's very first decision in this galaxy should be. Most importantly, if you want to see more epic characters from across the multiverse enter the Star Wars galaxy, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next adventure. The uneasy silence that followed the Battle of Vardos Minor lingered long after the last Separatist transport disappeared into hyperspace. Clone engineers moved methodically through the shattered battlefield, recovering damaged walkers and assisting medics as columns of smoke drifted lazily toward a darkening sky. Yet despite the Republic's victory, very few conversations centered on destroyed droids or successful tactics. Every soldier who had witnessed the impossible arrival found themselves glancing toward the small blue police box standing untouched near the command perimeter. It had survived artillery strikes, shockwaves, and enough blaster fire to reduce an armored transport to molten slag, yet its faded wooden panels bore little more than fresh scratches. Stranger still, preliminary scans refused to agree with one another. Some instruments claimed the object weighed less than an empty supply crate. Others insisted it possessed a mass greater than a Venator-class Star Destroyer. Internal readings fluctuated wildly, suggesting an impossible structure extending far beneath the planet's crust before abruptly vanishing altogether. Republic scientists argued until their voices became hoarse, each convinced their equipment had malfunctioned. The doctor merely smiled whenever another scanner produced contradictory results. To him, the confusion was almost comforting. After all, if the TARDIS had behaved normally in an entirely different universe, he would have been far more concerned. Anakin Skywalker had spent the return journey to the Republic cruiser studying the mysterious traveler from across the briefing chamber. He had encountered warriors capable of impossible feats, diplomats who concealed deadly intentions behind warm smiles, and politicians who manipulated entire star systems with carefully chosen words. Yet the man seated quietly near the viewport fit none of those categories. He radiated neither fear nor arrogance. Instead, he carried himself with the relaxed curiosity of someone visiting an unfamiliar city rather than arriving in the middle of a galactic war. Even after witnessing armies, starships, and lightsabers, he seemed more fascinated by the Republic's astromech droids than by the soldiers surrounding him. The doctor eventually noticed Anakin's unbroken stare and offered a cheerful smile. "You keep looking at me like you've got a question. I've got hundreds." "I was afraid of that." Obi-Wan Kenobi allowed himself the faintest smile before returning his attention to the stars stretching beyond the viewport. Beneath his calm expression, however, the Jedi Master remained deeply unsettled. Since the moment the doctor had stepped from the impossible blue box, Obi-Wan had repeatedly reached into the Force, searching for clarity. Instead of answers, he found contradictions. The doctor's presence refused to settle into a single point within the living Force. It was as though every version of the man who had ever existed, and every version who ever would, occupied the same space simultaneously. Sometimes Obi-Wan sensed extraordinary age surrounding him, older than many civilizations recorded within the Jedi archives. Other moments, the doctor felt surprisingly youthful, almost childlike in his excitement. It was not darkness that disturbed Obi-Wan. Nor was it light. It was possibility. "You said you remembered the artillery barrage," Anakin finally said, leaning forward. "Not predicted it. Remembered it." "I did." "How?" The doctor looked thoughtfully toward the stars before answering. "Time isn't always as straightforward as people think it is." Obi-Wan folded his hands within his robes. "You speak as though the future already exists." The doctor's smile faded almost imperceptibly. "Sometimes it does." Neither Jedi pressed further. The silence that followed carried more weight than any explanation could have offered. Hours later, the Republic cruiser emerged from hyperspace above Coruscant. Even after centuries of traveling between galaxies and civilizations beyond imagination, the doctor found himself standing motionless before the observation deck. Coruscant stretched endlessly beneath the ship, its ecumenopolis covering an entire world in glittering towers that pierced the clouds. Rivers of traffic flowed between skyscrapers like streams of light while orbital platforms surrounded the planet in carefully organized rings. Millions upon millions of lives pulsed beneath that endless cityscape, each connected through an invisible energy that the doctor could not fully understand yet somehow felt pressing gently against his thoughts. "The Force," he whispered quietly. He could not see it. He could not manipulate it. Yet after the dimensional collision that had drawn the TARDIS into this galaxy, he could almost hear its rhythm. It was unlike the Time Vortex, which roared with infinite possibilities. The Force resembled a heartbeat shared by an entire galaxy. Ancient, living, patient. And beneath that heartbeat, something else. Something hidden. The sensation vanished before he could identify it. Their shuttle descended through endless layers of cityscape before arriving at the Jedi Temple, whose elegant spires rose proudly above the surrounding districts. Clone honor guards escorted the Doctor through vast marble corridors lined with statues commemorating thousands of years of Jedi history. Younglings paused during training exercises to stare curiously at the stranger whose clothing looked nothing like anything found within the Republic. Jedi Knights quietly exchanged uncertain glances as word spread rapidly through the temple that General Skywalker and Master Kenobi had returned with someone who had apparently fallen from the sky inside a blue box. Within the High Council chamber, 12 seats overlooked the endless skyline of Coruscant. Masters Windu, Yoda, Cudi-Mundi, Pilo Koon, Shaak Ti, Kit Fisto, and the remaining council members waited in thoughtful silence as the chamber doors opened. The Doctor stepped inside. Immediately, 12 Jedi reached through the Force. Immediately, 12 Jedi frowned. Master Yoda's ears twitched ever so slightly. "Strange, you are." The Doctor inclined his head politely. "I've been called worse." Master Windu studied him with measured intensity. "General Skywalker has reported extraordinary claims regarding your arrival. Before we proceed, identify yourself." "The Doctor." "Doctor who?" "Just the Doctor." The council exchanged subtle glances. Obi-Wan offered a respectful bow before recounting everything that had occurred on Vardos. He described the dimensional rupture, the impossible police box, the Doctor's warning before the artillery strike, and the manner in which he had disabled an entire separatist assault without taking a single life. Throughout the account, the Doctor remained silent. When Obi-Wan finished, Master Windu turned his attention toward the visitor. "You appear human." "I'm not. You claim to have traveled here from another universe." "I didn't exactly plan the trip." "And you possess knowledge of events before they occur." The Doctor sighed. "That's complicated." Master Yoda closed his eyes, reaching deeper into the Force than perhaps anyone else within the chamber could. For several long moments, silence prevailed. Finally, the ancient Jedi Master opened his eyes once more. "Clouded, you are." The Doctor blinked. "Pardon?" "See you, the Force cannot." The chamber grew noticeably quieter. Master Cudi-Mundi leaned forward. "Impossible." "No," Yoda replied softly. "Different." The Doctor studied the diminutive Jedi Master with growing respect. "You can feel it too." Yoda nodded slowly. They wound in certainty. The Doctor's cheerful demeanor became unusually serious. "It isn't just me, is it?" The council remained silent. "The Force has changed since I arrived." Again, no one answered. The Doctor looked toward the great windows overlooking Coruscant. "I was hoping I was imagining that." Master Windu narrowed his eyes. "What exactly are you suggesting?" The Doctor walked slowly toward the panoramic windows, gazing over the endless city below. "In my universe, there are places where reality becomes thinner. Places where history can fold in on itself. Tiny fractures appear first, barely noticeable. Then they spread." He turned back toward the council. "When the TARDIS crossed into your galaxy, it didn't simply arrive somewhere else." He hesitated. "It collided with something." "The Force," Obi-Wan said quietly. "Exactly." Master Windu remained unconvinced. "And you believe this collision damaged the Force itself?" "No." The Doctor smiled sadly. "I think the Force is trying to understand me." Even Yoda appeared unsettled by that possibility. After the meeting concluded, Republic security escorted the TARDIS to one of Coruscant's highest research facilities, where engineers, physicists, and hyperspace specialists eagerly prepared to examine the impossible vessel. Massive sensor arrays surrounded the blue box while technicians connected every scanning device the Republic possessed. The results became even more confusing than those gathered on Vardos Minor. The interior could not be mapped. Power readings exceeded theoretical limits. Its engines operated without reactors. Its dimensions violated every accepted law of physics. One unfortunate scientist opened the doors expecting a cramped wooden compartment and nearly fainted upon discovering an immense control room extending farther than the building containing it. He removed his glasses. Bigger. Another scientist finished weakly. On the inside. The doctor grinned. Yes. He had heard that sentence countless times. It never grew old. While the Republic's greatest minds struggled to comprehend impossible engineering, the doctor quietly wandered through the corridors of the Senate district. He claimed he wished to stretch his legs after spending too much time answering questions, but in truth something had continued troubling him ever since arriving on Coruscant. Patterns. Cities always had patterns. Traffic. Politics. Architecture. Power. After centuries of wandering civilizations, the doctor had developed an instinct for recognizing when those patterns no longer aligned naturally. Coruscant was magnificent. It was also wrong. The Senate functioned. The Republic endured. The Jedi fought bravely. Yet beneath every success lay subtle inconsistencies. Military contracts expanded far too rapidly. Emergency powers accumulated within a single office. Fear increasingly replaced debate. No single observation proved anything. Together, they formed the outline of manipulation. Someone wasn't merely benefiting from the Clone Wars. Someone was conducting them. Far above the Senate district, in the highest office overlooking Galactic City, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine stood quietly before enormous windows with his hands folded behind his back. His expression remained perfectly composed as Mas Amedda entered carrying a freshly encrypted intelligence report. The individual recovered on Vardo's Minor has arrived at the Jedi Temple, Chancellor. Palpatine accepted the datapad without haste. His yellow Sith eyes remained hidden behind the warm smile known throughout the Republic. So, he murmured almost imperceptibly, our mysterious traveler has reached Coruscant. He studied the surveillance images of the blue police box, the impossible interior, and the strangely dressed man who claimed to be called only the Doctor. Then Palpatine felt something he had not experienced in many years. Not fear. Curiosity. For decades he had orchestrated every major event within the Republic with meticulous precision. Every political crisis, every military escalation, every carefully placed deception had moved exactly as intended. Yet this newcomer did not belong anywhere in his plans. And that made him dangerous. As the lights of Coruscant illuminated the endless night, two of the greatest strategists in two different universes unknowingly began studying one another. Neither had spoken a single word face to face. Yet both had already recognized the arrival of the only opponent either had never anticipated. Night settled over Coruscant, but unlike any other world the Doctor had ever visited, darkness never truly arrived. The city-planet glowed beneath an endless sea of artificial lights stretching from horizon to horizon, transforming the atmosphere into a shimmering tapestry of gold, blue, and crimson. Airspeeders streamed between towering skyscrapers in organized rivers of light, while thousands of landing platforms bustled with traffic from every corner of the Republic. From the upper levels, Coruscant looked like civilization perfected. Senators debated beneath magnificent domes, Jedi walked polished halls of marble, and citizens enjoyed luxuries unimaginable on the countless frontier worlds scarred by the Clone Wars. It was a city built to Project Order. Yet after only a single day within its endless skyline, the Doctor had already recognized the oldest truth in the universe. Whenever a civilization built its brightest towers, it almost always buried its darkest secrets beneath them. The Jedi Council had politely requested that he remain within the temple while Republic scientists continued studying the TARDIS. Obi-Wan had framed it as a matter of safety rather than confinement, while Anakin had argued that Coruscant was too dangerous for someone unfamiliar with its politics. The Doctor appreciated their concern. He also ignored it completely. Before sunrise, he slipped quietly from the temple through a maintenance corridor that no one had used in decades, borrowing a battered technician's jacket from a forgotten storage room along the way. His bow tie remained firmly in place. Some things, after all, were simply non-negotiable. The city welcomed him with its usual contradiction. Elegant plazas filled with fountains and monuments stood only a few kilometers above districts where rusting infrastructure barely held together. Massive Senate towers cast permanent shadows over neighborhoods that had not seen natural sunlight for generations. The further downward the Doctor traveled through Coruscant's countless levels, the more the polished facade of the Republic began to crumble. The clean scent of polished stone gave way to ozone, machine oil, damp metal, and recycled air. Neon signs buzzed above crowded marketplaces where smugglers, information brokers, bounty hunters, and refugees negotiated beneath flickering lights. Music from distant cantinas mixed with the grinding sound of ancient freight elevators, while conversations were spoken in dozens of different languages that blended into a constant murmur. Here, the Republic still existed, but only in theory. Credits, favors, and fear held far greater value than laws passed in the Senate above. The Doctor smiled to himself. Now this, he murmured as he wandered deeper into the Undercity, is where people tell the truth. Within an hour he had already learned more than several Republic intelligence divisions had uncovered in months. He listened rather than interrogated, asked curious questions instead of threatening anyone, and paid for information with simple acts of kindness rather than credits. A malfunctioning vapor purifier repaired with his sonic screwdriver earned him directions to a hidden marketplace. Helping an elderly Ithorian restart a broken cargo lifter earned him the name of a shipping coordinator who never appeared on official manifests. Buying a round of drinks for exhausted dock workers revealed that unusual cargo shipments had been moving through Coruscant's lower levels almost every week since the Clone Wars began. Individually, each discovery seemed insignificant. Together, they formed another pattern. The Doctor followed that pattern through abandoned freight tunnels until it led him to a forgotten warehouse nestled beneath level 1313. Cargo containers lined the enormous chamber, each bearing the insignia of legitimate Republic suppliers. At first glance, everything appeared perfectly ordinary. But the Doctor had spent centuries recognizing the difference between appearances and reality. He produced the sonic screwdriver, letting its emerald light dance across one of the containers. "Let's see what you're hiding." The device hummed softly. The shipping codes had been altered. The cargo records falsified. The destination erased. The container supposedly carried medical supplies. It actually contained advanced droid processors manufactured on worlds firmly under Separatist control. The Doctor frowned. Interesting. He opened another crate. Blaster power cells intended for Republic clone forces. The next, hyperdrive components destined for Separatist cruisers. Another, medical Bacta stolen from Republic hospitals. Another, food shipments disappearing before reaching starving colonies. Someone wasn't merely smuggling. Someone was ensuring that both sides of the war remained equally supplied. The Doctor slowly looked around the warehouse. This isn't profit. His expression grew serious. It's maintenance. A mechanical click echoed behind him. Half a dozen blaster rifles aimed directly at his back. Curious fellow, aren't you? The Doctor raised his hands without turning. Depends who's asking. A tall Weequay stepped into view, surrounded by heavily armed enforcers wearing the insignia of the Black Sun Syndicate. Their leader studied the strange visitor with narrowed eyes. "You've been asking questions all day." "I have. You've also been fixing people's equipment." "I enjoy being helpful." "And now you've wandered somewhere you shouldn't." The Doctor finally turned, smiling warmly despite the blasters surrounding him. "I was hoping someone would say that." The Weequay blinked. "What?" "People only guard places worth visiting." Several mercenaries exchanged confused glances. The Doctor continued before anyone could interrupt. "Here's the thing. If you shoot me, you'll spend the next several days explaining to your employer why Republic investigators suddenly started searching this warehouse. If you let me leave, I already know too much." Rather awkward dilemma. The Weequay's grip tightened. "So what do you suggest?" "Oh, negotiation." The Doctor took a slow step forward. "You tell me who owns this operation." "No. I tell you why they're using you." Silence settled over the warehouse. Curiosity briefly overcame suspicion. That was all the Doctor needed. They've convinced you this is about credits, he continued calmly. But it isn't. Whoever organized these shipments doesn't care who wins the Clone Wars. They care that the war never ends. The mercenaries remained silent. They're supplying both sides. The Weequay hesitated. They said balance keeps business profitable. No. The doctor's voice became unexpectedly solemn. Perpetual war keeps someone else in power. For the first time, uncertainty spread across the smugglers' faces. Far above Coruscant, light years away aboard the separatist flagship Invisible Hand, Count Dooku stood within his private meditation chamber. Before him floated dozens of holographic reports detailing troop movements, Senate debates, and confidential intelligence gathered across the Republic. One report immediately captured his attention. An unidentified outsider had appeared during the Battle of Vardos Minor. No known origin. Unknown technology. No detectable force signature. Single-handedly disrupted a separatist offensive without firing a weapon. Dooku dismissed the remaining reports and focused entirely on the newcomer. Unlike many politicians, the former Jedi understood the danger of anomalies. Wars were won by planning. Planning depended upon predictability. Anything unpredictable deserved immediate attention. Moments later, a holographic image of General Grievous materialized before him. "My lord." "General, I require information." Grievous folded his mechanical arms impatiently. The Jedi's new ally? Perhaps. Dooku's expression remained thoughtful. Or perhaps something considerably more interesting. Back on Coruscant, the doctor had accepted an invitation to tea. Ordinarily, accepting refreshments from armed criminals would have seemed unwise. Fortunately, Ordinary had never described him particularly well. Seated around a battered cargo crate serving as a table, he listened patiently as the Weequay explained how independent shipping companies had gradually fallen under the influence of anonymous investors who never revealed their identities. Payments always arrived on time. Cargo routes changed frequently. No one asked unnecessary questions because everyone earned far more credits than expected. "Did you ever wonder why?" the doctor asked. "We were told not to. That's usually the first clue." He leaned back thoughtfully. Someone has spent years building invisible supply lines that feed both armies equally. Every battle creates more demand. Every victory creates another shipment. The war keeps expanding because someone keeps making sure neither side can actually win. The realization settled heavily over the room. Even hardened smugglers disliked discovering they had become pawns. The doctor suddenly froze. There it was again. That faint feeling beneath Coruscant. The same subtle distortion he had sensed while overlooking the Senate district. Not the Force. Not quite. Manipulation. Carefully layered. Patient. Ancient. He closed his eyes. For a brief moment, dozens of scattered clues aligned within his mind like stars forming a constellation. Emergency powers. Military expansion. Manufactured crises. Secret supply routes. Political paralysis. Every thread converged toward the same unseen center. The Clone Wars were not spiraling out of control. They had been designed that way from the very beginning. The doctor slowly opened his eyes. "Oh." His cheerful expression disappeared entirely. "This war isn't inevitable." The smugglers looked at him in confusion. "What do you mean?" The doctor stared toward the ceiling, as though trying to see through thousands of levels separating the Undercity from the shining towers above. It was built. At almost the exact same moment, Count Dooku stood before the observation window of his flagship, gazing silently into hyperspace. Somewhere within the Republic, an impossible traveler had begun asking precisely the wrong questions. For reasons he could not fully explain, Dooku found himself smiling. Not because the stranger threatened the Republic, but because, for the first time in many years, someone else appeared to be searching for the architect hiding behind the war. The realization lingered in the doctor's mind long after he departed the forgotten warehouse beneath level 1313. Coruscant continued its endless rhythm above him, billions of lives moving with mechanical precision through streets, skylanes, and Senate chambers, completely unaware that every triumph and every tragedy might have been carefully orchestrated years before they ever occurred. It was not the first civilization he had encountered that mistook manipulation for destiny. Across countless worlds, he had seen tyrants convince entire generations that suffering was inevitable, only for history to reveal that every catastrophe had begun with a single deliberate choice. The Clone Wars bore all the hallmarks of such a design. Armies did not simply materialize on both sides of a galactic conflict. Economies did not reorganize themselves overnight. Democracies did not surrender extraordinary powers without someone patiently guiding every fear, every debate, and every crisis toward a predetermined conclusion. Someone had written this war long before the first battle droid ever fired a blaster. The Doctor knew one thing with absolute certainty. He needed to find the author. As dawn broke over Coruscant's highest towers, the Jedi Temple awoke to an unusual disturbance. Masters meditating within the ancient halls found their concentration interrupted by fleeting sensations that dissolved the instant they attempted to examine them. Padawans practicing lightsaber forms hesitated as instincts they had trusted since childhood suddenly became uncertain. Even the temple's oldest archives reported inexplicable fluctuations in the Kyber crystal vaults deep beneath the mountain. Nothing dangerous had occurred. Nothing visible had changed. Yet an invisible current had begun flowing through the Force itself, disrupting the clarity upon which generations of Jedi had relied. Within the council chamber, Master Yoda slowly opened his eyes. "Difficult," he whispered. "To see." Mace Windu frowned. "The future? The present?" That answer unsettled every member of the council. For thousands of years, the Jedi had accepted that the Force could be clouded by the dark side. Darth Sidious himself had carefully cultivated that blindness through decades of hidden corruption. But this felt different. The Force was not resisting them. It was hesitating. Certain possibilities that had once appeared fixed now shifted without warning. Familiar visions dissolved into countless branching outcomes before reforming into entirely different futures. Obi-Wan Kenobi recognized the source almost immediately. The Doctor. No accusation accompanied the words, only thoughtful concern. "He isn't causing this deliberately," Obi-Wan continued. "Whatever surrounds him, it changes how the Force perceives time." Yoda nodded slowly. "Outside the river, he walks." Meanwhile, within the Republic Science Ministry, the TARDIS continued refusing every attempt to obey conventional physics. Teams of engineers had spent the entire night constructing increasingly sophisticated sensor arrays around the blue police box, only to watch each instrument contradict the last. One scanner insisted the interior contained breathable air from at least 17 different planetary atmospheres. Another reported gravitational readings that changed depending upon who observed them. A hyperspace specialist confidently announced that the vessel possessed no recognizable propulsion system whatsoever before another scientist demonstrated that it appeared to exist simultaneously in several dimensional states at once. The Doctor wandered casually among them carrying a cup of tea. "I do appreciate the enthusiasm," he remarked while watching two physicists argue over equations covering an entire wall, "but you're asking the wrong questions." One exhausted researcher looked up. "What should we be asking?" The Doctor smiled. "Not how it works." He gently tapped the TARDIS doors. "But why she chose to bring me here?" The scientists exchanged puzzled glances. "She." The Doctor simply winked before stepping back inside. The great control room greeted him with its familiar rhythmic hum, although subtle differences had begun appearing since their arrival in the Star Wars galaxy. The crystalline central column pulsed slightly out of sequence, and strange symbols occasionally flashed across Gallifreyan displays before vanishing again. Most concerning of all were the navigation systems. Instead of showing stable coordinates through the Time Vortex, they displayed overlapping patterns resembling ripples spreading across an invisible sea. The Doctor adjusted several controls before sighing quietly. "You're feeling it too." The TARDIS responded with a low, mournful groan. "The Force." Another gentle vibration. "It isn't hostile." The engine settled slightly. "But it doesn't understand us." He rested one hand upon the central console. "Neither do I." Miles away, hidden beneath layers of political ceremony and carefully maintained appearances, another conversation unfolded within the shadows of the Chancellor's private office. Palpatine stood alone before Coruscant's skyline. To every observer within the Republic, he remained the patient statesman tirelessly guiding civilization through its darkest hour. In truth, Darth Sidious contemplated the first genuine uncertainty he had encountered in decades. The Doctor. Every intelligence report contradicted the last. Witnesses described impossible foresight, extraordinary intelligence, and technology beyond comprehension. More troubling were the observations supplied by agents hidden throughout the Jedi Temple. The Force itself reacted strangely around the newcomer. Sidious closed his eyes. He reached outward through the dark side, allowing his awareness to drift toward the impossible blue box housed within the Republic laboratories. Ordinarily, such perception flowed effortlessly. The Force carried whispers across star systems. Hidden fears, buried ambitions, and distant conflicts revealed themselves like echoes upon still water. This time, he found static. Not emptiness. Not resistance. Noise. An endless storm of overlapping possibilities drowned every attempt to perceive the traveler clearly. For an instant Sidious glimpsed countless faces belonging to the same man. Some appeared impossibly young. Others unimaginably old. One seemed burdened by unbearable grief. Another laughed while entire galaxies burned around him. Every vision collapsed before meaning could emerge. The Sith Lord's eyes snapped open. Fascinating. No being had ever disrupted his foresight in quite that manner. Most opponents concealed themselves. The Doctor overwhelmed observation itself. Sidious smiled. Assassination would be wasteful. Curiosity demanded conversation. The opportunity arrived sooner than either expected. Later that afternoon, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine formally invited the mysterious visitor to the Senate Executive Building under the reasonable pretense of welcoming an unexpected guest to the Republic. The Jedi Council approved the meeting reluctantly, assigning Obi-Wan and Anakin as escorts despite the Doctor's insistence that he could manage perfectly well on his own. The Chancellor's office radiated warmth rather than intimidation. Sunlight poured through towering windows overlooking the endless city while shelves lined with ancient artifacts projected the image of a thoughtful scholar rather than a politician. Palpatine greeted the Doctor with genuine charm, his smile calm and reassuring. "My dear Doctor," he said pleasantly, "Coruscant has been speaking of little else since your arrival." The Doctor studied the Chancellor carefully. Outwardly, everything appeared exactly as expected. Kind eyes. Measured voice. Perfect manners. Yet beneath that carefully constructed mask, there it was again. The same invisible pattern. Not visible. Not detectable through instruments. Simply from. The Doctor smiled politely. "I do have a habit of making unusual entrances." Palpatine chuckled softly. "So I've heard." Anakin relaxed almost immediately. The Doctor did not. Conversation flowed easily between them, touching upon history, exploration, and the burdens of leadership. Palpatine asked thoughtful questions without appearing intrusive, carefully allowing the Doctor to reveal only what he wished. Yet every sentence concealed another purpose. "Your people possess remarkable technology. We've had a bit of practice. And you've traveled through time itself?" "Occasionally." Palpatine leaned forward with carefully measured curiosity. "Tell me, if one possessed such knowledge, would it not become one's responsibility to prevent future tragedies?" The question lingered between them. The Doctor recognized it instantly. Temptation. Not toward power. Toward intervention. He looked quietly toward Coruscant beyond the windows. "There are moments," he said at last, "that must happen because changing them destroys everything built afterward. And others." The Doctor's expression became unreadable. "Others exist precisely so someone chooses differently." Palpatine nodded thoughtfully, though disappointment flickered behind his eyes. The Doctor knew more than he admitted. Far more. Yet he refused to reveal whether he had seen the Republic's future. Secrets remained useful. As the meeting concluded, Palpatine offered one final observation. "The Jedi believe destiny guides the galaxy. The doctor paused near the office doors. "I've met destiny." He smiled faintly. "It cheats." After the doctor departed, the smile vanished from Sidious's face. The stranger had confirmed several important conclusions without answering a single direct question. He understood time beyond anything the Jedi could imagine. More importantly, he possessed discipline. He knew information capable of changing history, yet withheld it deliberately. That made him infinitely more dangerous than any warrior. Across the city, the doctor rode silently beside Obi-Wan and Anakin aboard a Republic transport. Neither Jedi noticed how distant he had become. He had looked directly into the eyes of the most dangerous man in the galaxy. And he had recognized him. Not by evidence. Not by proof. By experience. He had seen too many smiling tyrants. Too many leaders who concealed unimaginable darkness beneath perfect civility. Yet he also understood something else. If he exposed Palpatine now, without undeniable evidence, the Republic would never believe him. History could fracture. Paradox could follow. The Time Vortex had taught him a lesson centuries ago. Knowing the future never granted permission to rewrite it carelessly. So the game would continue. One player manipulated governments through fear. The other unraveled conspiracies through patience. Neither could yet reveal everything they knew. And somewhere beyond ordinary perception, the Force itself continued struggling to understand the impossible contest unfolding within its own galaxy. Not a war of fleets or lightsabers, but a silent duel between two ancient minds, each determined to shape the future without allowing the other to see every move before it was made. The meeting with Chancellor Palpatine left the Doctor more troubled than he allowed either Obi-Wan or Anakin to see. As Coruscant's endless skyline disappeared behind the departing Republic shuttle, he remained silent, watching thousands of speeders weave between colossal towers like glowing rivers flowing through a canyon of steel. The city had revealed far more than its politicians intended. Beneath its magnificent architecture and carefully rehearsed speeches lay an invisible machine that fed upon fear, bureaucracy, and endless war. He had found its gears, traced many of its moving parts, and even stood face to face with the man quietly turning the wheel. Yet exposing Darth Sidious now would accomplish nothing except force the Sith Lord deeper into the shadows. There were no witnesses, no evidence that would survive Senate scrutiny, and no way to explain knowledge that the Doctor himself could scarcely justify without unraveling causality. The game demanded patience. Fortunately, there were other moves to make. The Republic expected him to remain under the informal protection of the Jedi Temple while scientists continued studying the TARDIS. Instead, before sunrise the following morning, the blue police box quietly vanished from its secured hangar without triggering a single alarm. Engineers later insisted every security system had remained fully operational. Surveillance recordings simply showed an empty room one moment and an equally empty room the next, as though the impossible vessel had politely excused itself from reality. When the TARDIS engines settled once more, the Doctor stepped outside into crisp morning air carrying the scent of ocean salt and flowering vines. Gone were Coruscant's endless towers and the constant hum of billions of lives stacked upon one another. Before him stretched gleaming white domes rising from the desert landscape of Mandalore, their elegant architecture shimmering beneath brilliant sunlight. The capital city of Sundari appeared almost untouched by the Clone Wars, protected behind massive energy domes that separated civilization from the barren wilderness surrounding it. The Doctor inhaled deeply. Much better. Yet the peace was deceptive. He had visited enough worlds to recognize silence maintained through extraordinary effort. Sundari radiated order, but not the effortless harmony of a flourishing society. It resembled a crystal balanced upon the tip of a needle. Beautiful, fragile, waiting for the smallest disturbance. As he walked through the city streets, Mandalorians hurried about their daily lives with quiet discipline. Children attended schools beneath towering glass ceilings while merchants traded goods from dozens of neighboring systems. Public gardens flourished beside government buildings, and fountains reflected sunlight into open plazas where citizens discussed art, education, and diplomacy rather than military campaigns. To an outsider, Mandalore seemed proof that civilization could reject war entirely. The doctor admired that dream. He also knew dreams were often the easiest things to shatter. His arrival had not gone unnoticed. Within the royal palace, Duchess Satine Kryze listened patiently as security officers attempted to explain how an unidentified spacecraft had entered Mandalorian space without appearing on any sensor network. The reports became even stranger once they described the craft itself. A blue box. The commander nodded. Standing in the middle of Keldabe Square. Satine raised an eyebrow. I assume this is some kind of joke. I'm afraid not, Your Grace. Moments later, the doctor found himself escorted into the palace by politely bewildered guards who remained uncertain whether they were detaining a trespasser or welcoming an honored guest. Satine regarded him with composed curiosity. I understand you've arrived without permission. I've done that before. And your vessel? The doctor smiled. She's rather independent. Satine had spent years negotiating with senators, diplomats, and military commanders from every corner of the Republic. Very few managed to surprise her. This man accomplished it within seconds. Unlike Republic officials, he expressed no interest in military alliances. Unlike separatist envoys, he made no attempt to exploit Mandalore's neutrality. Instead, he seemed genuinely fascinated by the society itself, asking thoughtful questions about education, infrastructure, and how a civilization once defined by conquest had transformed into one devoted to peace. You rebuilt your culture, the doctor observed while they overlooked Sundari from a palace balcony. We tried. No. He smiled warmly. You succeeded. For the first time that morning, Satine returned the smile. Far beyond the city, however, others watched with far less admiration. Hidden within abandoned mining complexes scattered across Mandalore's moon Concordia, members of Death Watch continued preparing for the day they would overthrow Satine's government. Armored warriors trained relentlessly beneath the leadership of Pre Vizsla, convinced that Mandalore had betrayed its ancient heritage by embracing pacifism. Reports concerning the mysterious off-world visitor reached their command center before sunset. Pre Vizsla listened in silence. A stranger arrives from nowhere. The scout nodded. He met privately with the Duchess. And the Republic? No military escort. Vizsla rested one gauntlet hand upon the darksaber. Find him. The doctor, meanwhile, had spent the afternoon wandering Sundari almost unnoticed. Unlike politicians who remained confined within government buildings, he preferred marketplaces, schools, and public transit systems. Civilizations rarely revealed themselves during official ceremonies. They revealed themselves while ordinary people lived ordinary lives. Children laughed freely. Teachers spoke without fear. Citizens trusted their government. Everything appeared genuine, which made the hidden tension even more troubling. By evening, the doctor stood alone overlooking the energy barrier protecting Sundari from the desert beyond. Producing his sonic screwdriver, he quietly scanned the city's immense shield generators. The readings puzzled him. Someone had repeatedly tested the defenses from outside. Not enough to trigger alarms. Just enough to measure weaknesses. He frowned. Preparing. A voice behind him interrupted his thoughts. You ask unusual questions. The doctor turned to find Satine approaching without guards. I've been told that's one of my better qualities. She joined him beside the shield generator. You came here for more than sightseeing. I did. Then tell me why. The doctor hesitated. Because the truth sounded impossible. I think someone wants your government to fall. Satine smiled faintly. Many people want that. No. The doctor shook his head. I mean someone who doesn't care who replaces you. Her expression changed. What do you mean? They're creating instability everywhere. The Republic. The Separatists. Criminal syndicates. Supply chains. He looked beyond the shimmering barrier into the endless desert. Mandalore is next. Before Satine could respond, emergency sirens erupted across the city. Explosions thundered beneath Sundari's eastern district. The shield flickered violently. Panic spread through nearby streets as security forces rushed toward the disturbance. Death Watch had begun its operation. Not a full invasion. A calculated provocation. Smoke billowed into the evening sky while armored commandos struck government facilities with remarkable precision before vanishing almost as quickly as they appeared. Their objective was not conquest. It was confidence. The Doctor reached the first damaged district moments after Mandalorian security forces established a perimeter. Instead of chasing attackers, he immediately began examining blast patterns, damaged support columns, and disabled communication relays. They wanted this section. A security officer stared. Why? The Doctor pointed toward a shattered power conduit. They ignored weapons depots. Another gesture toward an untouched government archive. They bypassed command centers. Finally, he looked directly at the damaged shield generator. They came for this. Within minutes, he confirmed his suspicion. The attack had concealed the installation of sophisticated signal beacons buried beneath the city's infrastructure. Individually harmless, together they could guide future assaults directly through carefully mapped weaknesses in Sundari's defensive network. Satine arrived beside him. Can they be removed? Yes. He paused. But they were never the real objective. She frowned. Then what was? They wanted your people to believe the city isn't safe anymore. Silence followed. The Doctor had seen the tactic countless times throughout history. Fear always accomplished what armies could not. Later that night, aboard a concealed Death Watch transport leaving Mandalore, encrypted transmissions carried detailed shield data toward unknown recipients elsewhere in the galaxy. The Doctor intercepted only fragments. Enough to identify sophisticated encryption unlike anything Death Watch normally employed. Someone else had supplied the technology. Someone wealthier, patient, invisible. The same unseen hand manipulating the Clone Wars had quietly reached toward Mandalore as well. Satine found him once more before dawn. You've helped save this city. For today. You could remain. The Doctor looked toward the TARDIS standing quietly outside the palace. I never remain. She understood. Then before you leave. She hesitated. What would you do? The Doctor remained silent for several moments. Finally he answered. If I expose Death Watch publicly tonight, Mandalore survives. She nodded hopefully. But they become martyrs. Her shoulders sank. If I allow them to escape, they remain fugitives. But they'll attack again. They will. Satine looked toward the awakening city she had dedicated her life to protecting. There isn't a perfect choice. The Doctor smiled sadly. There almost never is. By sunrise, Death Watch had escaped Mandalore exactly as history expected. But one crucial difference remained. Every hidden beacon planted beneath Sundari had been removed before its data reached the shadowy figures orchestrating events across the galaxy. It was a small victory. Invisible to almost everyone. Yet somewhere aboard a distant separatist vessel, Count Dooku quietly studied an incomplete transmission containing corrupted Mandalorian intelligence. For the first time in years, one of Darth Sidious's carefully arranged operations had failed without anyone understanding exactly why. The Doctor watched the twin suns climb above Mandalore's horizon before stepping back into the impossible blue box. He had not saved the future. He had merely nudged it. Sometimes, after centuries of watching civilizations rise and fall, he had learned that the smallest changes echoed farther through history than even the greatest victories. The TARDIS dematerialized from Mandalore with its familiar wheezing groan, but the sound no longer carried the comforting certainty the Doctor had known for centuries. Beneath the rhythmic rise and fall of the engines lay an unfamiliar vibration that pulsed through the control room like a second heartbeat. Gallifreyan symbols flickered unpredictably across the central console before dissolving into patterns he had never encountered. The dimensional stabilizers, normally among the vessel's most reliable systems, fluctuated every few seconds despite repeated recalibration. The Doctor worked quickly, his hands dancing across levers, switches, and crystalline interfaces with the practiced confidence of a Time Lord who had repaired the impossible more times than he cared to remember. Yet every adjustment produced the same unsettling conclusion. The TARDIS herself was no longer simply navigating an unfamiliar universe. She was reacting to it. He rested both hands on the console and listened. The engines answered with a low, mournful groan. "I know," he said softly. "I don't like it either." The TARDIS pulsed again, this time projecting a cascade of temporal calculations across the holographic displays. Instead of the orderly currents of the Time Vortex, the readings showed expanding fractures radiating outward from the point where she had first entered the Star Wars galaxy. The dimensional scar had not healed. It had grown. More troubling still, faint threads of impossible energy extended far beyond normal space, converging upon a single location hidden somewhere within the Force itself. The Doctor stared at the display. No. He quickly recalculated. The answer remained unchanged. The breach was no longer merely connecting two universes. It was searching for something. Far away on Coruscant, Master Yoda experienced the same disturbance while meditating beneath the ancient roots of the great tree preserved deep within the Jedi Temple. For centuries that sacred place had served as one of the Order's strongest vergences in the Force, a point where the living Force flowed with unusual clarity. Yet today the currents behaved differently. Instead of flowing peacefully around him, they twisted into spiraling eddies before rushing toward an unseen destination beyond ordinary perception. Ancient memories whispered through the Force, echoes of forgotten Jedi, lost civilizations, and pathways that should have remained hidden forever. Yoda opened his eyes slowly. Awakened, he whispered the word to no one. Something has. Within hours, the Jedi Council received reports from across the Republic. Temples on distant worlds recorded unexplained surges of Force activity. Ancient meditation sites long thought dormant suddenly resonated with unusual energy. Even kyber crystals stored within the temple vaults emitted faint harmonic pulses, as though responding to a call only they could hear. Obi-Wan immediately thought of the Doctor. Anakin did not wait for permission. The Republic cruiser carrying both Jedi intercepted the TARDIS just as it materialized within orbit above the jungle world of Bardatta, home to one of the oldest surviving Force vergences in the galaxy. The Doctor emerged before either Jedi could speak, his usual cheerful expression replaced by unmistakable concern. "You felt it?" Obi-Wan nodded. "The Force has changed." The Doctor looked toward the dense forests covering the planet below. "No." His voice carried unusual gravity. "It's changing." Together they descended into ancient ruins that predated the Republic by thousands of years. Massive stone arches rose from tangled vines while weathered statues of forgotten Force practitioners stood silently among enormous trees whose roots had slowly claimed the abandoned temple. Moisture hung in the warm air, carrying the earthy scent of moss, rain, and ancient stone. Birds fell strangely silent as the three travelers approached the heart of the ruins. Anakin instinctively rested one hand near his lightsaber. "Something's here." The Doctor shook his head. "No." He looked around slowly. "Something's waking up." At the temple's center stood a circular chamber unlike anything either Jedi had previously encountered. Intricate carvings covered every wall, depicting figures surrounded by luminous currents that intertwined with stars, galaxies, and unfamiliar geometric symbols. Unlike traditional Jedi iconography, these carvings portrayed the Force not as light opposing darkness, but as an endless network connecting realities themselves. The Doctor stepped closer. This wasn't built by the Jedi. Obi-Wan studied the carvings carefully. "No." He frowned. "It predates them." As the Doctor raised the sonic screwdriver, the device immediately overloaded with brilliant blue sparks. The entire chamber responded. Ancient symbols ignited. The air vibrated. The Force itself seemed to inhale. Without warning, a column of shimmering light erupted from the center of the chamber, surrounding the Doctor and extending high into the ruined ceiling. Images flashed within the luminous pillar faster than thought itself. Planets formed and died. Civilizations rose and vanished. Countless futures collided before dissolving into endless possibility. Then another image appeared. A vast realm filled with endless pathways suspended outside conventional reality. Doorways. Bridges. Moments. Time itself arranged like corridors waiting to be walked. Anakin staggered backward. "What is that?" The Doctor whispered the answer almost involuntarily. The world between worlds. Obi-Wan looked sharply toward him. You know this place? I know places like it. The vision faded only slightly, enough for distant voices to become audible. They spoke in countless languages simultaneously, some familiar, others entirely unknown. Fragments of Gallifreyan merged with forgotten Force dialects, creating harmonies that neither belonged to the Time Vortex nor the living Force. The Doctor listened intently. They're overlapping. What is? Obi-Wan asked. Our universes. He pointed toward the fading pathways. The breach didn't simply tear through space. His expression darkened. It connected two systems that were never meant to touch. Before either Jedi could respond, another presence briefly appeared within the vision. A cloaked silhouette. Watching. Not entering. Waiting. It vanished before details became clear. The Doctor's face tightened. We're not the only ones who've noticed. Back inside the TARDIS, the Doctor immediately began dismantling several crystalline stabilizers surrounding the central console. Components floated weightlessly through the vast control room as he worked with increasing urgency, occasionally muttering calculations in Gallifreyan too quickly for either Jedi to follow. Anakin finally broke the silence. Can you fix it? The Doctor paused. The TARDIS? No. Anakin looked directly at him. Whatever this is. The Doctor considered the question carefully. I can slow it. That's not the same answer. No. He resumed working. It isn't. The central column pulsed brighter than before as new calculations streamed across every display. The TARDIS had identified the dimensional convergence with increasing precision. Every fracture spreading through reality pointed toward the same hidden nexus. The world between worlds. Not merely a place. A junction. The Force's own architecture of time. The Doctor suddenly understood why the TARDIS had brought him here instead of returning home. She hadn't become lost. She had followed the breach. Far away, within the hidden chambers beneath the Chancellor's office, Darth Sidious stood before an ancient Sith holocron recently awakened by the disturbances flowing through the Force. Crimson light spilled across the room as forgotten inscriptions emerged from the artifact's surface. The holocron spoke of a realm beyond time. A place where history itself could be observed. Altered. Controlled. Sidious listened without moving. For decades he had sought ultimate dominion over the galaxy. Now the Force whispered of something greater. Dominion over causality itself. A slow smile crossed his face. So, he murmured, it exists. Meanwhile, Count Dooku experienced a similar revelation aboard his flagship. Ancient Sith records recovered from abandoned temples contained fragmented references to gateways outside ordinary existence, though none described how such places might be reached. Until now those writings had seemed little more than mythology. Not anymore. Across opposite sides of the war, master and apprentice unknowingly reached the same conclusion. The impossible traveler had arrived for a reason. Back within the TARDIS, the Doctor finally completed his repairs. The engine stabilized, their familiar rhythm returning at last, though not entirely. A faint secondary pulse remained, synchronized with the distant vergence they had just witnessed. He sighed. That's as good as it's going to get. Obi-Wan looked around the impossible control room. What happens now? The Doctor gazed toward the time rotor rising and falling before him. Now we stop thinking this is only about the Clone Wars. He looked at both Jedi with quiet seriousness. The Republic is in danger. He paused. So is my universe. The weight of those words settled heavily over the control room. For weeks, everyone had believed the Doctor's arrival represented an extraordinary accident with unpredictable political consequences. Now the truth had become far more alarming. The Clone Wars were merely the surface of a much older crisis. Something hidden within the deepest mysteries of the Force had begun reaching beyond its own reality. And somewhere, in shadows stretching between time itself, another player had already begun moving toward the same destination. The TARDIS drifted silently through hyperspace, but for the first time in centuries, the Doctor found little comfort in the familiar rhythm of her engines. Normally, traveling between worlds offered him precious moments to think, to organize impossible problems into manageable pieces, and to search for the tiny thread of hope hidden inside every catastrophe. This time, however, every answer he uncovered seemed to create two more questions. The dimensional fracture connecting his universe to the Star Wars galaxy continued expanding despite his repairs. The world between worlds had awakened in response to the breach, and Darth Sidious had already begun searching for it. Most dangerously of all, the Doctor now knew the identity of the Sith Lord manipulating the Clone Wars. That knowledge alone carried enough weight to alter history forever. He stood motionless before the central console, staring at a holographic projection of the Republic timeline. Thousands of events stretched before him in shimmering strands of light, each connected to countless others through invisible threads of cause and consequence. The TARDIS had reconstructed as much of this universe's temporal history as her damaged systems allowed. Bright points marked moments of extraordinary importance. The Battle of Geonosis, the Siege of Mandalore, Order 66, the fall of Anakin Skywalker, the destruction of Alderaan, the Battle of Endor. Every decision rippled outward across decades. Slowly, another timeline appeared beside it. His own. Gallifrey. The Time War. The Pandorica. Trenzalore. Each universe possessed its own history, yet where the dimensional fracture had formed, those histories now touched. Tiny intersections spread like cracks across glass. The Doctor whispered to himself, "If I move one..." The projection responded immediately. Entire centuries shifted. Stars vanished. New futures appeared before dissolving into chaos. He closed the display with a frustrated sigh. There was the answer he had dreaded. Stopping Darth Sidious today would not simply change this galaxy. It would destabilize both realities simultaneously. The TARDIS emitted a gentle, sympathetic hum. "I know." He rested a hand against the console. "I hate it too." Hours later, the TARDIS materialized within the secluded gardens surrounding the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. Morning sunlight filtered through ancient trees whose roots had stood since the earliest days of the Republic, while fountains carried gentle streams of water through carefully cultivated stone pathways. It should have been peaceful. Instead, tension lingered in the air. Obi-Wan was already waiting. "I suspected you'd return." "I usually do." The Jedi Master smiled faintly before noticing the unusual exhaustion etched across the Doctor's face. "You've seen something." The Doctor looked toward the temple's towering spires. "I've confirmed something." They walked together beneath the trees in silence until Obi-Wan finally asked the question that had troubled him ever since their journey to the ancient virgins. "You know who is behind this war?" The Doctor stopped walking. For several long seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, the Doctor answered, "Yes." Obi-Wan inhaled slowly. "Can you prove it?" "No." "Can you tell me?" Another silence followed. The Doctor's expression carried genuine regret. "I shouldn't." Obi-Wan frowned. "Shouldn't or won't?" "They're the same answer." The Jedi Master studied him carefully. "You've earned my trust, Doctor." "I know." "Then trust me." The Doctor looked into Obi-Wan's eyes, seeing only sincerity. If there had been any safe way to reveal the truth, he would have done so immediately. Instead, he quietly shook his head. "If I tell you today..." His voice became almost inaudible. "Billions could die who otherwise wouldn't." Obi-Wan had expected many explanations. That was not one of them. The truth can do that? When time is involved? The Doctor forced a weary smile. "It usually does." For the first time since their meeting, Obi-Wan stopped viewing the Doctor as merely an extraordinary traveler. He saw the burden instead. Knowledge carried like an invisible wound. Not power. Responsibility. Across the temple, Anakin Skywalker found himself unable to dismiss the Chancellor's recent conversation from his thoughts. Palpatine had always encouraged him to question authority, to trust his instincts above rigid Jedi traditions. Until recently those lessons had seemed wise. Now the Doctor's arrival complicated everything. The stranger had never directly accused anyone. He had never even spoken Palpatine's name with suspicion. Yet every instinct Anakin possessed told him the Doctor had recognized something during that meeting. Something important. Later that afternoon, Anakin intercepted the Doctor while Republic technicians finished recalibrating security systems around the TARDIS. "You know something about the Chancellor?" The Doctor looked up from adjusting the sonic screwdriver. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you looked at him differently." The Doctor remained silent. Anakin continued. "Everyone likes Chancellor Palpatine." "I noticed." "You don't." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." The Doctor sighed. "Anakin." "No." The Jedi Knight stepped closer. "If someone is manipulating this war, I need to know." The Doctor regarded him with unmistakable sadness. "You really do." The answer only deepened Anakin's frustration. "If you know who's responsible, why aren't you stopping them?" The Doctor looked toward the endless skyline of Coruscant. "Because I've done that before." "What?" "I've changed history." He smiled bitterly. It almost destroyed everything. Anakin struggled to understand. "You're saying innocent people have to suffer?" "I'm saying history isn't a straight line." The Doctor finally looked directly at him. "Sometimes removing one monster creates 10 worse ones." Anakin wanted to argue. Instead, uncertainty settled into his thoughts. For perhaps the first time in his life, someone had suggested that doing the obviously right thing could become catastrophically wrong. Far beneath the Senate district, Darth Sidious reached a different conclusion. His spies had confirmed repeated meetings between the Doctor and senior members of the Jedi Order. More concerning still, surveillance indicated increasing trust between the Traveler and Obi-Wan Kenobi, while Anakin Skywalker had begun asking questions that previously never would have occurred to him. Time was shortening. The Doctor represented an unpredictable variable. Variables required acceleration. Within the hidden Sith sanctuary beneath the Chancellor's office, Sidious activated encrypted communications reaching Count Dooku. "The next phase begins immediately." Dooku inclined his head. "The timetable changes?" "Yes. The Republic is not yet fully prepared." "They will be." Sidious deactivated the transmission before offering further explanation. He could no longer rely upon years of careful pacing. If the Doctor continued uncovering hidden truths, sooner or later coincidence would become certainty. Order 66 would come sooner than originally intended. Across the galaxy, separatist offensives intensified almost overnight. Worlds previously considered strategically unimportant suddenly came under attack. Republic fleets found themselves stretched thinner than ever as emergency deployments multiplied across every major sector. Senators argued for even greater military authority while frightened citizens demanded decisive leadership from Chancellor Palpatine. Exactly as Sidious intended. The Doctor watched the news unfold aboard the TARDIS with growing concern. "He knows." Obi-Wan looked up. "He knows what?" "That someone is hunting him." The Doctor paced around the console. "I've forced him to move faster." "Isn't that good?" "No." The answer came instantly. "It means he's improvising." "And that's dangerous?" The Doctor stopped pacing. "The most dangerous people in the universe are the ones who stop following their own plans." The TARDIS suddenly emitted a sharp warning tone. Every monitor illuminated simultaneously. The dimensional fracture. It had expanded again. This time, the projections showed something new. Brief openings. Tiny windows lasting fractions of a second. Inside them appeared impossible images from entirely different realities. Gallifreyan cities. Dalek warships. Cybermen marching beneath unfamiliar stars. The Doctor's expression hardened. "No." Obi-Wan stared in disbelief. "What are those?" "My mistakes." The windows vanished as suddenly as they had appeared. Silence settled over the control room. The Doctor understood the implications immediately. If the breach continued widening, it would no longer remain confined to two universes. Other realities would begin bleeding through as well. Civilizations separated by the fundamental laws of existence would collide. Entire histories would unravel. Billions would perish before understanding why. He finally looked toward Obi-Wan. "You asked why I won't expose Sidious." The Jedi Master nodded. The Doctor's voice carried the weight of centuries. Because if I stop him the wrong way... He glanced toward the fading dimensional readings. I might end every universe connected to this one. Outside, Coruscant continued shining beneath its endless sea of lights, blissfully unaware that its greatest battle was no longer merely the Clone Wars. Hidden beyond politics, armies, and even the Force itself, a far older struggle had begun, one where victory and defeat could no longer be measured by who ruled the galaxy, but by whether reality itself survived the choices that still lay ahead. Coruscant's night sky split open above the Senate District. At first, citizens mistook the phenomenon for an unusual aurora. Curtains of blue and violet light rippled between the towers, reflecting across the endless rivers of traffic and bathing the city in ghostly color. Then the lights began to fracture. Thin cracks spread through the air itself, revealing impossible glimpses of other realities beyond the stars. For a heartbeat, a fleet of silver ships appeared where no ships should exist. In another crack, a world covered in crimson storms flickered into view before vanishing again. Across the galaxy, similar tiers opened above distant systems, and panic spread faster than any military transmission. Inside the TARDIS, alarms screamed. The Doctor moved from console to console with desperate speed while holographic maps filled the control room. Each new fracture pulsed like a wound in space-time, and together they formed a widening network stretching across dozens of star systems. "It's accelerating," Anakin said. The Doctor nodded grimly. "The world between worlds is becoming unstable. The breach isn't just connecting universes anymore. It's turning the Force itself into a crossroads." Obi-Wan studied the projections. "Can it be contained?" "Yes. But..." The Doctor looked toward the central time rotor. "Someone is helping it grow." Silence filled the room. They all understood who he meant. Within hours, the Jedi Council convened an emergency session unlike any in living memory. Masters who had spent decades debating trade disputes and military campaigns now watched recordings of reality tearing apart above Republic worlds. Entire hyperspace routes had become unstable. Several fleets reported ships vanishing into luminous storms before reappearing hundreds of light-years away. Ancient Force vergences across the galaxy were awakening simultaneously. Yoda listened as the Doctor explained what was happening. The dimensional collision created a resonance between the Time Vortex and the Force, the Doctor said. Normally that would remain localized. But someone has begun probing the world between worlds. Mace Windu frowned. "Darth Sidious." "He doesn't fully understand what he's touching," the Doctor replied. "That's what makes this dangerous." Yoda's expression darkened. "Stop him, we must." The Doctor shook his head. "Not with an army. Not with a fleet. We need every faction capable of reaching the affected systems before the fractures become permanent." "You expect the Republic to cooperate with smugglers and criminals?" Windu asked. "I expect reality to collapse if we don't." The alliance that formed over the next 3 days would have seemed impossible only weeks earlier. Jedi strike teams coordinated with Mandalorian pilots loyal to Duchess Satine. Independent freighter captains agreed to carry evacuation supplies through unstable hyperspace corridors. Even several underworld networks from Coruscant's lower levels provided intelligence after learning that the fractures threatened their own territories. For the first time since the Clone Wars began, enemies worked beside one another not for victory, but for survival. The Doctor never claimed command. Instead, he moved constantly between groups, solving problems faster than anyone else could identify them. When a Mandalorian squad refused to fly alongside Republic forces, he quietly arranged a rescue mission that saved their stranded clan brothers. When smugglers demanded impossible payment, he revealed that several fractures were already consuming major trade routes. When Jedi Masters argued over protocol, he handed them a list of worlds that would become uninhabitable within 48 hours if they continued debating. Leadership through persuasion. Leadership through urgency. Leadership through making everyone realize they were already on the same side. The first major operation began above the mid-rim world of Killoran. A fracture nearly 2 kilometers wide had opened in orbit, distorting gravity and pulling debris from surrounding space. Republic cruisers struggled to maintain position while civilian ships fled in every direction. Mandalorian fighters will stabilize the perimeter, the doctor said over the comm network. Jedi teams, you're targeting the vergence below the city. Smugglers, I need every transport you have evacuating civilians before the next surge. Explosions flashed across the stars as vulture droids emerged unexpectedly from hyperspace. Separatist commanders, unaware of the true crisis, believed the Republic was defending a strategic installation and launched an attack. The battle erupted instantly. Venator Star destroyers exchanged fire with Separatist frigates while Mandalorian gauntlet fighters streaked between them like silver arrows. On the planet below, Jedi led evacuation columns through streets shaking with temporal shockwaves that caused buildings to age decades in seconds. The Doctor stood inside the TARDIS, directing the operation through dozens of overlapping transmissions. Republic cruiser Resolute, rotate your shields 20 degrees starboard. Mandalorian wing, the fracture is pulling you off course. Compensate now. Smuggler convoy, don't enter hyperspace within 500 kilometers of the anomaly unless you enjoy arriving last week. Against all logic, the plan worked. By nightfall, millions had been evacuated and the fracture had temporarily stabilized. Far away aboard the Invisible Hand, Count Dooku watched reports arrive from across the galaxy. Something was wrong. Republic fleets were abandoning strategically valuable positions to respond to mysterious disturbances. Jedi and Mandalorians were cooperating openly. Even criminal syndicates appeared to be moving supplies toward affected systems rather than exploiting the chaos. Most troubling of all, Darth Sidious seemed pleased. Dooku activated a private transmission. My master, the Republic is diverting enormous resources toward these anomalies. As expected. Expected? Sidious's hologram flickered with calm confidence. The galaxy is approaching transformation, Lord Tyrannus. Dooku narrowed his eyes. These disturbances were not part of our original design. The Force evolves. And the Doctor? For the first time, Sidious hesitated almost imperceptibly. He has become useful. The transmission ended. Dooku remained motionless for several long seconds. Useful. Not dangerous. Not threatening. Useful. Slowly, a realization began forming that he had avoided for years. Perhaps he had never truly understood his master's final objective. The crisis reached its worst point above. The core world of Brental. 3 major fractures merged into a single expanding storm that swallowed entire starships. Republic and Separatist vessels alike vanished into luminous voids while impossible echoes of other universes flickered across space. The Doctor stared at the readings in horror. No, no, no. Obi-Wan stepped beside him. What is it? The Doctor pointed to the projection. It's becoming self-sustaining. Another few hours and the fractures won't need the original breach anymore. Then we stop them now. The Doctor looked up, exhaustion visible beneath his usual energy. This is the last chance. A final alliance assembled above Brental, Republic cruisers, Mandalorian fighters, civilian transports, underworld freighters, and Jedi interceptors forming a defensive ring around the growing storm. Across the stars, Separatist fleets arrived as well, drawn by orders they barely understood. Neither side realized they had become pieces in Sidious's final gambit. The Sith Lord intended to let the crisis peak, then seize control of the world between worlds amid the chaos. But for the first time in decades, one variable remained beyond his calculations. The Doctor stood at the center of the impossible blue box, surrounded by allies who should never have trusted one another, preparing to challenge a catastrophe that threatened not merely the Republic, but the boundary between universes themselves. Outside, the fractures spread across the stars like cracks through a galaxy-sized mirror. And somewhere within the storm, something ancient had begun to awaken. The storm surrounding Brental ceased to resemble a natural phenomenon. Entire constellations disappeared behind walls of shimmering light that twisted like liquid glass, while reality itself folded inward upon an invisible center. Republic cruisers, Separatist destroyers, Mandalorian gauntlet fighters, and civilian transports alike struggled simply to remain intact as impossible gravitational tides surged through space. Every few seconds another fracture burst open across the battlefield, revealing fleeting glimpses of places that belonged to entirely different universes. Towering cities suspended beneath crimson skies. Fleets of impossible silver starships. Endless oceans beneath unfamiliar constellations. Each vision lasted only moments before dissolving back into the expanding temporal storm. Inside the TARDIS, every warning system had reached critical failure. The central time rotor rose and fell violently, its normally steady rhythm replaced by desperate convulsions that shook the entire control room. Gallifreyan symbols cascaded uncontrollably across every monitor while the dimensional stabilizers glowed brighter than they had since the final days of the Time War. The Doctor stared at the readings. "We're out of time." Obi-Wan felt the force pressing against his mind with unbearable intensity. "It feels..." He struggled for words. "Alive." "It is." The Doctor's voice remained calm despite the chaos surrounding them. "The Time Vortex and the Force are trying to occupy the same space." Anakin looked toward the storm outside. "What happens if they succeed?" The Doctor hesitated, then answered honestly, "Neither universe survives." Silence settled over the control room. Not because anyone doubted him. Because they believed him completely. The TARDIS suddenly lurched forward without the Doctor touching a single control. "No." He rushed toward the console. "She's chosen." The impossible blue box accelerated directly into the heart of the collapsing nexus. Outside, Republic and Separatist commanders watched in stunned silence as the tiny blue police box disappeared into a storm that swallowed capital ships whole. For one impossible moment, everything stopped. Sound vanished. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Then the Doctor stepped out of the TARDIS. He stood upon a bridge suspended in endless light. There was no sky, no ground, only pathways stretching infinitely in every direction, each containing countless moments suspended like living memories. Entire histories shimmered beyond translucent doorways. Futures not yet lived existed beside forgotten pasts. Every choice ever made echoed endlessly throughout the impossible realm. The world between worlds. Only now, it was breaking apart. Massive fractures tore through its ancient pathways as streams of golden force energy collided with brilliant currents flowing from the Time Vortex. Entire corridors collapsed into luminous voids while countless doors blinked in and out of existence. The Doctor looked around slowly. "I was afraid of this." A calm voice answered from behind. "So was I." The Doctor turned. Standing only a few meters away, his dark robes perfectly still despite the collapsing reality surrounding them, was Darth Sidious. For the first time since arriving in the Star Wars galaxy, the Doctor and the Sith Lord stood alone. No armies, no politics, no deception. Only two ancient minds confronting one another at the edge of existence. Sidious regarded the impossible landscape with quiet admiration. Magnificent. The Doctor remained motionless. "It's dying." "Everything dies." Sidious smiled. "The difference is that some of us choose what comes afterward." The Doctor looked toward the endless pathways. "You've been trying to reach this place." "I have." "You don't understand it." "I understand enough." Sidious stepped closer. "Imagine it, Doctor." He gestured toward the infinite corridors. Every failure corrected. The shattered pathways responded as though listening. The Republic remade. Another gesture. The Jedi erased before they become obstacles. 1,000 possible futures flickered. No rebellion. Another. No empire. Another. No war. Sidious's yellow eyes burned with quiet conviction. History itself rewritten. The Doctor listened without interruption. Finally, he smiled sadly. "You really believe history is the problem? The weak make history untidy. The living make history untidy." The Doctor slowly walked toward one of the glowing doorways. "You've spent your entire life trying to control every outcome." He looked back. "But life isn't supposed to be controlled. It is supposed to be perfected." "No." The doctor shook his head gently. It's supposed to surprise us. Sidious regarded him thoughtfully. You disappoint me. I get that a lot. The Sith Lord's expression hardened. You possess something no Force user has ever commanded. His voice echoed through the collapsing nexus. Mastery over time itself. The pathways surrounding them illuminated brilliantly. You could prevent every tragedy. The doctor remained silent. You could save worlds. Another step. You could preserve Gallifrey. The doctor froze. For the first time, Sidious saw genuine pain behind the Time Lord's eyes. You've seen them die. The Sith smiled. I can feel it. The world between worlds responded immediately. A doorway opened. Beyond it stood Gallifrey. Golden towers. Orange skies. His home. Untouched. Alive. Voices echoed across the winds. Friends long dead. Family. An entire civilization waiting. The doctor stared without breathing. Sidious's voice became almost gentle. Walk through. Another doorway appeared. The Jedi Temple. Younglings laughing. No Order 66. Another. Padme alive. Anakin smiling beside her. Luke and Leia growing together without war. Another. A republic that never became an empire. Countless futures unfolded before him. Every regret. Every loss. Every impossible dream. The world between worlds offered all of them. The doctor slowly closed his eyes. His heart pounded painfully inside his chest. He had carried these losses for centuries. Now, for the first time, he could erase them. The temptation was almost unbearable. When he finally opened his eyes again, tears rested there. He whispered quietly, I miss them. The image of Gallifrey shimmered. So very much. Sidious waited. Certain victory had finally arrived. Instead, the doctor stepped backward. Away from every doorway. Away from every perfect future. Away from every life he could have restored. No. The single word echoed across the collapsing realm. Sidious frowned. You refuse? I refuse to become you. The doctor's voice grew stronger. History matters because people choose. He looked toward Gallifrey one final time. If I rewrite every tragedy... His voice cracked slightly. Then none of the people who survived them become who they were meant to be. The doorway closed. Gallifrey vanished. The doctor stood straighter. We're shaped by our scars. Sidious's calm mask finally fractured. You choose suffering. I choose freedom. The collapsing pathways shook violently. The world between worlds itself seemed to respond. The doctor sprinted toward the central convergence where the Force and the Time Vortex collided in blinding torrents of impossible energy. Sidious understood immediately. You fool! Force lightning erupted from his fingertips. The doctor never looked back. Instead, he slammed both hands onto the dimensional anchor connecting the TARDIS to the Nexus. The engines answered. Every bell inside the impossible ship began ringing simultaneously. No, the doctor whispered to her. You know what has to happen. The TARDIS groaned mournfully. She obeyed. Every reserve of temporal energy accumulated across centuries flooded directly into the collapsing Nexus. Golden Force energy intertwined with brilliant blue streams from the Time Vortex. Reality itself screamed. Across the galaxy, every fracture began closing. Brental stabilized. Coruscant skies healed. Ancient vergences quieted. The impossible collision slowly unraveled. Sidious reached desperately toward the fading pathways. No! His vision of absolute control dissolved before his eyes. The world between worlds sealed itself. One doorway after another vanished forever. The final bridge beneath the Sith Lord's feet collapsed into light. He disappeared into ordinary space, thrown violently back toward Coruscant before he could seize even a fragment of the realm's power. His greatest ambition, but perhaps forever. The doctor collapsed beside the silent TARDIS console. The engines had stopped. The central rotor stood motionless. Every Gallifreyan display had gone dark. The impossible machine that had carried him across eternity. had sacrificed nearly all of her temporal energy to save 2 universes. She still lived, but barely. The doctor gently rested his forehead against the silent console. "You magnificent old girl." His voice trembled. "You saved them." Outside, across countless star systems, reality finally settled. The war continued. The Republic endured. History remained imperfect, but existence itself had survived. Far away on Coruscant, Darth Sidious slowly rose within the hidden chambers beneath the Senate. His plans lay in ruins. The path to unlimited dominion over time had vanished. Yet as rage slowly faded, something else replaced it. Patience. History had not ended, only changed. And across the stars, the doctor stared at the powerless TARDIS, knowing the greatest victory of his long life had come at the cost of the one companion who had never once abandoned him. Silence settled across the galaxy in a way no one could quite explain. It was not the silence that followed victory, nor the uneasy calm that often arrived after great battles. It was something older, deeper, as though the Force itself had finally exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. The brilliant fractures that had scarred the heavens disappeared one by one, leaving behind ordinary stars that looked strangely unfamiliar to those who had spent days watching reality unravel. Republic navigators reported that hyperspace lanes had stabilized. Ancient Force vergences returned to their quiet slumber. The strange echoes from impossible worlds faded until they became little more than memories that many would later convince themselves had never existed at all. Only a handful of beings truly understood how close existence itself had come to collapsing. The doctor was one of them. He stood alone inside the TARDIS, surrounded by silence unlike anything he had ever known. The engines had stopped. The familiar rhythmic wheezing that had accompanied him across centuries was gone. The central time rotor remained perfectly still, its crystalline column dim and lifeless beneath the soft glow of the control room lights. The great ship that had once laughed in the face of impossibility now rested like a sleeping giant whose strength had finally been spent. The doctor gently placed both hands upon the console. "You did it." No cheerful hum answered him. No playful adjustment of the controls. No subtle vibration beneath his fingertips. For the first time since stealing the old Type 40 from Gallifrey so many lifetimes ago, the TARDIS felt quiet. Not dead. Never that. Merely exhausted. She had poured centuries of stored temporal energy into sealing a wound between universes. Even a machine as extraordinary as the TARDIS had limits. The doctor smiled sadly. "I suppose we're both getting old." Behind him, the control room doors opened. Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka entered quietly, instinctively lowering their voices as though they had stepped into a sacred place. Obi-Wan immediately noticed the stillness. "Is she alive?" The doctor answered before the question finished. "But she'll need time." "How much?" The doctor looked around the vast chamber. "Years." Anakin frowned. "Years?" The doctor nodded. "Maybe longer." No one spoke. The realization settled slowly. The impossible blue box that had crossed dimensions, challenged Sith Lords, and saved reality itself could no longer travel. For the first time in countless centuries, the doctor was stranded. News of the dimensional catastrophe never reached the wider Republic in its full form. Official reports described unexplained hyperspace anomalies, unusually powerful force disturbances, and a coordinated emergency response involving Republic and neutral systems. Most senators welcomed the explanation. Citizens, relieved that the strange lights had disappeared from their skies, preferred not to ask difficult questions. History often simplified what it could not understand. Yet among those who had witnessed the truth, the story spread quietly. Clone troopers spoke of an impossible blue police box appearing where no ship should fit. Mandalorian warriors told tales of an unarmed traveler who won battles without drawing a weapon. Smugglers laughed over drinks as they remembered the madman who somehow convinced pirates, Jedi, and senators to cooperate for a single impossible mission. Each version sounded less believable than the last. Each remained true. Without intending to, the doctor had already begun becoming a legend. Several days later, the Jedi Council invited him back to the temple. Unlike his first visit, no guards waited outside the council chamber. No suspicion lingered in the air. Only respect. Master Windu regarded him thoughtfully. When we first met, I believed you represented a threat. I usually do. A faint smile crossed Windu's face. This time, I was mistaken. The doctor shrugged. I've been mistaken too. Yoda slowly rose from his chair. Changed us, you have. I hope not too much. The ancient Jedi shook his head. Understand more now, we do. The doctor remained silent. The Force. Yoda continued. A prison it is not. The words surprised even the other masters. For centuries, the Jedi had studied the Force as the foundation of existence. Now they understood that existence itself might contain mysteries even the Force did not fully explain. The doctor had not diminished their beliefs. He had expanded them. Yoda bowed deeply. The doctor immediately bowed in return. No further words were needed. Elsewhere on Coruscant, another meeting unfolded beneath the Senate building. Count Dooku stood before Darth Sidious with unusual calm. The failure at the World Between Worlds had changed something between them. For years, Dooku had believed himself a partner in the creation of a new galactic order. Now he recognized what he should have seen long ago. He had always been expendable. You withheld the truth. Sidious remained seated. I withheld what you did not need. You risked existence itself. I risked victory. The difference, Sidious's yellow eyes narrowed, is irrelevant. For perhaps the first time since becoming Darth Tyrannus, doubt entered Dooku's heart, not about the Republic, but about the Sith themselves. He left the chamber without another word. Sidious watched him go. He sensed the change immediately. Distrust. The first crack in a relationship built upon manipulation. The doctor had never spoken directly to Dooku. Yet somehow he had planted a question more dangerous than any weapon. For the first time, the apprentice had begun questioning the master. History had shifted. Only slightly, but enough. Days turned into weeks. The Clone Wars continued. Battles still erupted across distant systems. Political corruption remained. The Republic still drifted toward its uncertain future. The doctor had not ended the war. He had never expected to. History resisted simple solutions. Yet beneath the familiar surface, subtle changes continued spreading. Republic intelligence quietly established permanent communication channels with several neutral Mandalorian factions. Smugglers who had fought beside Jedi occasionally accepted humanitarian missions instead of purely profitable contracts. Scientists studying the abandoned energy signatures left by the TARDIS began developing safer hyperspace stabilization technology decades earlier than history originally intended. Small changes. Tiny ripples. Exactly the sort the doctor preferred. One evening, Anakin found the doctor sitting atop one of the temple's highest balconies, watching Coruscant's endless sunset. For several minutes neither spoke. Finally, Anakin broke the silence. I know you still aren't telling me everything. No. The doctor smiled gently. I'm not. You know what's going to happen. I know possibilities. Anakin looked toward the distant skyline. Am I one of them? The doctor hesitated. You are. And you still won't tell me. If I told you who you become. He looked directly at Anakin. You might become someone even worse trying to avoid it. The younger man absorbed the answer quietly. I don't understand. I know. The doctor stood. But understanding isn't the important part. What is? Choice. The single word lingered between them. The future isn't written by prophecy. The doctor rested a hand on Anakin's shoulder. It's written by the next decision you make. He walked away before Anakin could ask another question. Those words remained with the Jedi Knight long after the doctor disappeared into the temple corridors. Obi-Wan found him the following morning beside the silent TARDIS. You've decided. The doctor nodded. I can't stay. You said the TARDIS cannot travel. Not through time. Obi-Wan frowned. But through space. The doctor smiled. Very slowly. The old ship had recovered just enough energy for ordinary flight. Nothing more. Returning to his own universe remained impossible. For now. Obi-Wan folded his arms. You'll wonder. I always do. And if the galaxy needs you again? The doctor looked affectionately toward the blue box. We have a habit of arriving exactly where we're needed. Obi-Wan laughed softly. I suspected as much. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, the Jedi Master extended his hand. I've had many teachers. The doctor accepted the handshake. So have I. But few reminded me that wisdom begins by admitting what we do not know. The doctor's smile broadened. That's the best place to start. Hours later, beneath a sky painted gold by Coruscant's setting sun, the impossible blue police box stood alone upon a quiet landing platform overlooking the endless city. Anakin, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, several members of the Jedi Council. Even Duchess Satine, having arrived from Mandalore that morning, stood silently watching. No speeches filled the air. No grand ceremony marked the departure. The doctor disliked farewells that pretended they were endings. He simply adjusted his worn coat, glanced at the familiar blue doors, and smiled at the friends he had somehow found in a galaxy that had never been his own. You'll be all right. No one answered. Perhaps because none of them entirely believed it. The doctor stepped inside. The doors closed. A moment later, the ancient engines groaned weakly. Not the triumphant roar they once possessed. Just enough. The TARDIS slowly faded from view. The sound lingered across the platform for several long seconds before disappearing into silence. Gone. No destination recorded. No flight plan filed. Only another mystery left behind. Years later, clone veterans would swear they occasionally heard that strange wheezing sound during impossible moments. Mandalorian children would grow up believing a blue box appeared whenever history itself needed protecting. Young Jedi studying forgotten archives would discover impossible references to a traveler who knew the future yet refused to control it. Most historians dismissed such stories as myth. Those who had stood on that landing platform knew better. Some legends were too extraordinary to fit neatly inside history books. Some travelers belonged not to one world or one universe, but to every place where hope stood against certainty. And somewhere beyond the stars, carried by an old blue box that refused to give up, the last of the Time Lords continued wandering toward whatever impossible tomorrow awaited him next. The Clone Wars continued, as history often insists they must, but they no longer followed precisely the path that destiny had once prepared. Tiny changes, almost invisible on the scale of a galaxy, began rippling outward through countless lives. Jedi questioned old certainties with greater humility. Mandalorians found unexpected reasons to trust former enemies. Even those who never learned the Doctor's name unknowingly lived in a galaxy made stronger by his compassion. The greatest victory had never been defeating Darth Sidious in battle. It had been proving that hope, wisdom, and restraint could challenge a darkness that sought to dominate not only the galaxy, but time itself. For the Doctor, the journey ended as so many of his adventures did, with sacrifice instead of triumph. His beloved TARDIS had surrendered nearly all her temporal power to seal the wound between universes, leaving the last Time Lord once again a wanderer with no certainty of finding his way home. Yet he carried no regret. He had refused the temptation to rewrite history, understanding that even painful futures belong to those who must choose them freely. That choice preserved the integrity of both universes and ensured that courage would always matter more than absolute power. Far beyond the stars, rumors of an impossible blue box would continue to spread, whispered by soldiers, Jedi, smugglers, and ordinary citizens alike. Whether remembered as a myth, a guardian, or simply a mad traveler with two hearts, one truth endured. In a galaxy ruled by the Force, one extraordinary outsider proved that destiny itself could be challenged, not through conquest, but through kindness, conviction, and the courage to let others choose their own future.
The multiverse doesn't end here. New invasions, new empires, and new worlds collide daily. If you enjoy deep cinematic, what-if scenarios like this, subscribe and join Multiverse Galaxy If.